For today's Utopias podcast, I'm very, very excited and honored to invite into conversation with me Jacques Servin. Jacques is hilarious and brilliant and quite a character, a comedian, a prankster, and definitely an activist, and is half of the iconic prankster activist duo, the Yes Men. They are an activist duo that exposes wrongdoings and injustices that are put forward by massive corporations. And what they do is they produce fake spectacles. They disrupt events and they destroy brands. Some of you might have heard of the Yes Men before. Of course, there's a movie called Yes Men, but that's not the same thing as here. But they've released a few movies, which have been, at least the last one was produced and directed or involved the active engagement of Adam McKay, who's a big person here in Hollywood, the director of The Big Short, the director of the Anchorman movies, etc. So the Yes Men now are actually partnering with other activist organizations and schools to train, coach, and collaborate. So the Yes Men are kind of what one might call hacktivists. They're hackers. They want to introduce noise into the signal. They want to kind of jar us, shock us a little bit, make us laugh also at the same time. And by doing so, cast a clear light about what is or is not reality. So my conversation with Jacques Servin, half of the Yes Men, was recorded some time ago, July 3rd, 2023. And this conversation discusses some of their pranks, including what they did in relation to the Bhopal disaster in India related to the Union Carbide Corporation and Dow Chemicals, the elder care abuse system, and most importantly, how each of us actually can make small impacts every day to improve our world and really kind of move us toward a more utopian vision. That's not sort of like some imminently realizable outcome, but one where we feel a sense of hope. A short disclaimer for all of you as you listen to this hilarious and fun conversation. Um, Jacques uses various epithets and cuss words some different times, so just keep that in mind. So with that said, welcome to Utopias, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jacques Servin of the Yes Men. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you, Jacques, and it's not the first time that I've had a chance to chat with you about anything and everything. I know you know this, but I've long been a big fan of the Yes Men and of you, of course, as a person beyond that. And I thought we could just have a really open-ended conversation about your own work and your own practice as an artist, as an interventionist, and really where your own practice is heading, and your goals and beliefs and aspirations for our planet at this crazy time. So thank you for joining Utopias, Jacques.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's start with where you were as a young kid or a boy. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into the arts? Were you into the arts? We can start right there.
Yeah, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where I am now again for, reasons of family. And I was, I guess, in the arts. I mean, I played music my whole life, piano lessons since I was tiny. And I got very involved in high school in the drama club, mainly because they were people like me, kindred spirits and, homosexuals. So uh, it was necessary for me to have a little group. And in those times, it was even harder to be gay in high school than it is now. So that was a real lifesaver. Not that I came out at that point yet. I wasn't that brave, but having a little group around me was very important. And I think it's in my nature to play tricks on people. Because I the first thing I did when I had this little community around me was play tricks on them. I remember specifically, maybe not the first thing, but at least the second thing. I remember several really strange in retrospect things that I did. Like this was the Iran Contra hostage crisis was happening at that time, and I went around telling everybody I was the grandson of the Ayatollah Khomeini, until people believed me, and I or we're in doubt about it. They did. I don't know who believed me, and I have no idea what was in my head. Like, why was I doing this exactly? It doesn't make sense to me anymore. But they got back at me. My friends got back at me by playing a big prank on me, telling me that I had done some incredibly embarrassing things while drunk on a field trip, and I totally ended up believing them. And it like for a week I believed it and got more and more and more mortified until finally somebody told me they had played a trick on me. And I think I experienced this as love. So I I don't. Yeah, I will leave it to others to analyze me, but that's just that's just the facts there. And I've been like that since I was a small child, done strange things. So I think it's in my DNA, perhaps surrounding my DNA rather than in it. More epigenetic than genetic. But yeah, somehow there's something in me that maybe it's the same part that can't that isn't good at speaking directly about things, or I don't know. I get to affection through trickery, and I think that's kind of informed my life.
Were there certain musicians or artists or maybe even comedians, pranksters, performance artists that you were into at that age? And like, what age are we talking about roughly?
I guess I heard about Alan Abel when I was maybe 12 or 13. I heard about a couple of things he had done. They were very famous. There was like the school for beggars that got a tremendous amount of, like, there was a school where you could go to school to learn how to beg, and people were coming out of there and making 30,000 a year salaries. As beggars. And somehow everybody believed this, including me. And there were a couple of other things like that struck me. But I didn't imagine doing that at all. But I do remember it, so obviously it lodged in my head. Well, as a kid until college, I was really entirely about classical music. I really had no other interests. Didn't listen to anything other than classical music, and my parents didn't at home listen to anything other than classical music. And I think it just, yeah, why listen to anything else? It's definitely the best music. And then in college, I got interested in the culture around music, which it turns out is generally much more interesting than the music itself. And the punk culture, specifically in Tucson at that time, which was early 1980s, was really vibrant and, exciting and strange. And the antithesis of everything that I'd grown up with and that anybody had grown up with. It was a total rejection of everything, but there was also something extremely positive about it. And I really gravitated towards that. I felt like I was on the fringes of that, though. I never pierced much or did any music myself, but many of my friends did, and we had big punk parties. My first boyfriend and I had big punk parties and trashed our house and stuff like that. So that was my world for a little while.
I hear you and I relate to you with that. For me personally, I was a college radio DJ and I was really into free jazz and really into punk. Sometimes the music itself, but more the community that said, "Hey, I'm against this, but I'm for this."
Right.
Right? And this idea that you can actually have a community of people who care about some of the same things as you, but also care about one another. I feel like that's really central to a certain aspect of both punk and art culture, certain types of art culture. So, I don't know if you remember this well, but I remember seeing you speak at UCLA, where I'm a professor that's hosting this podcast, in the design media arts department. I think, Jacques, that was before I met you, and that was maybe about 10 years ago, at least. Could be more. It was just you, not Igor. The word queering came up quite a bit. I don't think you used it as much as the hoity-toity academics that were there. And I wanted to ask you about that word, or just about the practice of messing around, introducing deviance into signals as a certain kind of like as a practice, because I see that, and please, please redirect me if needed, but like I see that in a lot of stuff that you were up to early on.
Yeah, no, in retrospect, if I look at it, I feel like, oh yeah, I obviously was just, in a way, recycling ACT UP, stuff that I had lived through in San Francisco when I was there in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. That was, the big cultural influence on me at that point. And the way that ACT UP had of coping with a profoundly horrible, unspeakably horrible situation and being incredibly creative about it was deeply inspiring, and I think set me creatively in the direction I went. And I always reference that sort of approach, doing something creative in spite of it all, finding ways to fuck with the powers through ridicule as well as direct action. Not that we ever did much direct action, but we were we tried to support it, and we did the fucking with the kind of mocking. Yeah, so I don't know. Queering is, yeah, it's one of those academic words that means not much. And to me, like what we do as interventionists, which is another word that means nothing. What we do with our, like I can't even speak that one. I can speak that language, but it kind of makes me upchuck into my mouth. So I prefer to just say the way I see it. The Yes-Men, we use creative techniques that are well known, that are well established, that lots of people use for all sorts of art and film and whatever. And we use those techniques as well as other ones that are not artistic at all, like writing press releases and sending out mass emails or whatever, to try to mess with the dominant narrative. And more importantly, it's not really messing with the dominant narrative that's our goal. The goal is to get news. The goal is to, simply get news around an issue that's important. So, I can't say it more simply, I don't think, than that. Our goal is to get news around an issue that's important. What we do in the service of that is, creative techniques, is like this and that anybody can do. Calling it creative techniques or calling it queering or calling it any of that just elevates it and makes it sound like it's complicated. But it's not. It's just like looking at the situation, thinking, okay, how can I do some mischief here? How can I get a message in there? How can I get the media to report a message? How can something interesting come out of this that fucks with the message that they're trying to get out, which is, the wrong message? So that's basically it.
Yeah. I because for me personally, some of the stunts the Yes Men have pulled, and I'm going to get to stuff that maybe you were doing on your own even before that in a minute, but some of the stuff you guys have done jars my attention to actually get me to, it's like a cognitive dissonance thing. It's sort of like, oh, wait a second, like, how could this have happened when the world, I'm so like exhausted and overwhelmed by the world being the way it is. I remember, I think I was in college, Jacques, or maybe right after college. I heard about these punks. I'm saying that term loosely, but these artists who had switched up Barbies and GI Joes.
That was Igor. That wasn't me.
That was Igor. So okay, so that's actually what I wanted. That gets me where I want to go actually, because I knew you were up to various things you've told me about before on your own, maybe before or while you met Igor, and that Igor was also up to other things. Like I know you were inserting scenes into video games.
Yeah, I accidentally. I mean, my story is that I accidentally created a media spectacle without intending to. And I was really just trying to fuck with my job, as is my nature, because I hated my job at that point. And I had basically quit or been fired from about 5 jobs in the previous 2 or 3 years. it had always worked out great for me. I made more money the next time. It was during the .com shit in San Francisco when the first inklings of tech destruction were making themselves felt. Now it seems like ancient history and a kind of sweet time, but it was horrible at the time. 90% of the nonprofits got evicted in the course of the few years before 1999 when the .com boom was happening. Anyways, I benefited from that. There was a lot of demand for programmers, and I picked up programming on the job, falsified a resume, got a pretty good job, got sick of it, quit that job, falsified another resume, got a better job, et cetera, et cetera. Until finally I was coding for Maxis. I was one of the first two coders on The Sims. And then I was transferred to another game, and then I was like, okay, this is no longer fun. I don't like this job. And I did I did a version of what I had done several times before at other jobs. I fucked it up. And the way I fucked it up was putting a bunch of boy figures into the game that would kiss each other madly at certain points and just go around smooching instead of, doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. This was at triumphant moments in the game. And it was supposed to happen very rarely. And it went off like just after they had shipped thousands of games to store shelves. And so it created quite a stir, mainly because A, I got fired, and B, I told some reporters about it that I happen to know and be friends with, and one of them wrote an article in Wired about it, and that ended up in the AP, or I was interviewed for an article in the AP, and then I was on television. It was all over the place, and it was quite surprising. I found myself just enjoying it and, riding that wave of notoriety and coming up with ex post facto kind of like rationalizations for why I had done this. Other than I'm sick of it, I want to lose this job. I came up with some activist motivation, but at the same time thought like, wow, you could do this for activist reasons. You could do this actually with this sort of thing with an activist motivation. The first thing I did after that was imagine a world in which there's an organization that pays people like me to do this sort of thing. And I created this simulacrum of that, wrote a manifesto, and made this sort of facade of this organization that was funding all sorts of workers in companies to sabotage their products, and yada yada yada. Somebody was like, "You should meet Igor, this guy who did the Barbie GI Joe thing, and you guys might hit it off." And I told him about this shadowy organization that had paid me to do this, and I just, the way I was telling people, like I was just lying to them. The way I had in high school said I was the grandson of the Ayatollah Khomeini. I was telling people, yeah, I was paid to do this. It's like there's this shadowy organization, and I tried to get my friends to agree to say they had been paid by it, but with Igor, I told him over the phone, yeah, I was paid, and he said, oh yeah, me too. I remember I was paid by them for what I did with the Barbies and GI Joes. So he didn't even need the urging to say that he had been part of it. And
He didn't bat an eye, huh? He was like, "Oh yeah, that's my hustle too."
yeah, they paid me. Yeah, they paid me. That organization.
What was the name of that company that paid you both?
RT Mark. It was like the registered trademark sign and the TM sign and ARC, and yeah, there was a whole rationale to that I can't remember, but yeah.
So did you go to school in Tucson too, like college? Did you study art there, or where?
I never studied art. I studied math, physics, creative writing, anthropology. I never wanted to leave. I just kept studying things.
At U of A? Were you
Yeah. Yeah, my father was a professor there, so I had essentially a free ride and no direction in life. So I just stayed for 6 years and studied everything I could.
And Professor Chomsky is at U of A.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
For the last several years, and loves Saguaro National Park. Actually, when I interviewed him for my book, he was telling me about Saguaro. Incredible. Yeah. So okay, so you moved to San Francisco. Like, why San Francisco? What's San Francisco like in that area? So we're talking early '90s or late '80s? Like when?
Early 90s, late 80s, early 90s.
I was a high school student. No, I was a middle school student
Hmm.
in the area then from Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah. There were different worlds, as there always are. My world was the young, slightly reluctant to become an adult queer world, that people like me who just knew that they needed to breathe and be in an environment where they were fully accepted, and you know, it was still even in those years, it was still kind of a fucked up environment in this country for queers, and so there it was possible to like live a full queer life, and I had a great time. I spent the entire 90s there. It's where I really you know, figured out, not figured out, I made stabs at becoming an adult, and I'm still working at it, but I made my first stabs at becoming an adult by you know, getting a profession, which I think all artists or writers or people who don't know quite what to do should be told to do. You know, just grab a trade, learn to, you know, make wood things, or in my case it was computer programming. I was drawn to it. I immediately, you know, just on the job I picked it up, and then, you know, ended up as a games programmer, et cetera, and got an education from ACT UP and what was happening around that. And I finally left when I gave up on the city at the height of the .com boom, when, you know, the tech world had, it felt like it had destroyed the city. That was premature. I think I was ready to leave, but like, it still hasn't fully destroyed the city. It's still there, and there's still a weirdo world of misfits like me who live there and thrive. And now that, especially now that tech is crashing, it might have a whole renaissance. But at the time, it felt like, oh, this is definitely over, and I branched out and tried other things with my life.
San Francisco in 2000.
Yeah, I left in 2000. Yeah,
Yeah, and you met Igor. Did you meet Igor in San Francisco?
I was in San Francisco, and he was in San Diego in graduate school.
The two of you didn't. So you didn't go to UCSD
No,
for an MFA or anything. That was Igor.
yeah, I went to LSU for an MFA in creative writing.
Oh, interesting. So you meet Igor right in the late 90s. Would that be correct?
97? Yeah. I came up with Artmark, spread that around a little bit, met Igor in the first few months of that, like early 97 probably.
Mm.
I think it was 97 or maybe 98 that we actually got together and worked on some stuff. Yeah.
What'd you think of him when you met him? Did you feel like he's similar to you in certain
I
ways?
think we both felt a kind of kinship. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had already pulled off this G.I. Joe Barbie voice box switching effort on his own. And that was thousands. Am I correct about that? Like thousands of
No, I think in reality it was like 10, but they made it seem like thousands, you know.
Okay, just for all the listeners, the story is one of switching up the voice boxes, if I'm not mistaken, between Barbies and GI Joes right around Christmas, so that kids could have a bent experience with these hyper stereotypical icons. So all right, so Yes Men, that starts happening then late 90s, like that as a name for the two of you.
No, we like one of the problems with art talk and queering this, or, you know, intervention this, it makes it all sound intentional. Like, people start out and they go, I want to queer this thing, or I want to intervene here. There's something that I need to intervene in. It doesn't work that way. You just follow your gut and you end up doing things. And, you know, it's a lie to say that there's any intentionality behind it in at least my experience. And I know the two of us, we just stumbled into doing this representation, or whatever you want to call it, of big corporations at conferences by accident. And the way it happened first was I had started playing around with imitating websites. I'd made a fake McDonald's website, a fake Shell website. This was 1999, and it was really the beginning of website culture. And so you could make a fake website, and it would get news just because it was out there. So like people noticed the fake Shell website, and on the front page I had satirical information about Shell, and as if they were speaking a little too seriously. It wasn't satirical, actually. It was more like transparent. They were talking about their own crimes in a little too transparent a way. Just because that damn website was there, I got invited to a conference. That was 1999. That's how it was back then. Then, in November of 1999, the same year, the anti globalization movement began, meaning, white people got involved in the anti globalization movement, which had actually already been going on since, oh, I don't know, at least the early 90s in Mexico and South America, and probably the late 80s. I don't know when Cochabamba was, but 1994, the Zapatistas declared war on the Mexican state over NAFTA. And that was a very inspiring moment for a lot of white people, Europeans, Americans, because they did it in an incredibly theatrical way. And they used a lot of very clever techniques. And they were not just like gun-toting terrorists or guerrillas or whatever. They were theatrical, yet very, very, very serious. They actually were declaring war against the Mexican state, but they were doing it with fake guns and real guns. But they were really fighting for hearts and minds, I guess you could say, and doing tours of the country, having encuentros, they called them. That's where the it's ripped off from the Zapatistas, the name for these academic conferences. But that was their mode, and that inspired a lot of Western activists, a lot of European activists to, realizing, oh, there's a different way to protest stuff. And by the way, there's this enormous system taking over the world that we should be protesting. And then anti-globalization movement was born with the Battle of Seattle, November. It was the occasion was the second big meeting of the World Trade Organization, which was kind of the sign bearer for neoliberalism, which was a long story of where that comes from. After World War II, framework to guarantee peace, probably well-meaning, turns out not to work the way the original people thought. But the WTO was established as a way to basically allow free trade to occur across borders, regardless of what the people in the countries might want. And so a lot of people took that as a good target, and tens of thousands of people were expected to march on Seattle with the goal of shutting it down. And they did shut it down and actually made a giant stink. And that was the birth of what we remember as the alter globalization or anti-globalization movement. We were inspired, and I had already been making these fake websites, so I just made one for the WTO, and somebody gave us the domain that could easily be mistaken for the WTO's domain, and it worked. It people started quoting it, and best of all, the WTO itself attacked us and said, these guys, they're making fake websites. This was at the time when tens of thousands of people were marching on them. They chose to focus on this website, hopefully to distract maybe from the tens of thousands of people. I don't know why they did, but their head of PR himself made a statement against us. So I assume he had thought through why he was doing it. What that did was bring a bunch of media attention to our website. And then the media attention got it seeded into search engines, and people would often stumble on the wrong site when they searched World Trade Organization.
Because the media had given the fake website attention.
Yeah.
So it actually contributed to the fake website being elevated.
Exactly. And so the first intervention was at a conference in Salzburg, Austria, where this law conference accidentally invited us instead of the real WTO to give a keynote address at their conference. And we went, and the rest you can read on our website. I won't go into all the details because we've got a lot to talk about, but But that's basically how we got started as the Yes Men.
Yeah, and I'll just get you to zero in on one of the stunts, just one, and then people can, of course, if you want, and people can, of course, look up and watch the many movies that are out, which I'm going to ask you about the last one briefly. That was one of the last times I saw you in Los Angeles when you were presenting, I think, the Yes Men's last movie, which is that Fix the World?
No, that's the middle one. That's my favorite one.
I like that. What was the last one?
The Yes Men are revolting.
Or
But
Revolt?
the Yes
Yeah.
Men Fix the World, I think, is like kind of the best because it really communicated the issues very clearly and kind of worked like one of our actions, which, they try to be vehicles for information. Our actions are trying to be vehicles for information. We use creative techniques and also just standard PR techniques to get information that should be out there. And the movie kind of did that by quoting a lot of the free market think tank people who don't usually go, on lefty TV telling people what they really think. They did it in our movie because we tricked them. We pretended to be right wing filmmakers making a doc about Milton Friedman, and they just let loose, and we got to communicate what they really think, which is easy to sum up in one sentence. It's like, let the rich do whatever they want, and that'll be great for everyone. Government should just shrivel up and disappear. It's so preposterous on the face of it. Like, it's hard to believe adults believe this ever, but they do, and they say it on camera. And our we thought maybe by just making it ultra clear what they think and surrounding that with a bunch of funny actions that illustrate what they think in a way, we could really demolish this worldview. Of course, that's naive, but when you make a movie, you have to have a grand vision because it's so damn difficult to make a movie. So that was our vision.
Everybody, please check out the Yes Men's three, if I'm not mistaken, movies, which I've watched all of them long before I met you, actually. I mean, the last one came out after I knew you. But
you can just stream it directly from our website.
So, I'm speaking to you, Jacques, from Oaxaca, which you may recall. I've been doing field work with indigenous communities that are, it's not even about indigenous per se, but just communities that are trying to reorganize themselves because they've seen firsthand, dating back to the early 90s, Zapatista time period, but even before, how, wait a second, we've planted maize or corn for thousands of years, Zapotec communities, for example, and all of a sudden, we can't sell our crops anywhere close to the same price that we used to because somehow all these mega agro corporations that use, obviously toxic chemicals that destroy the earth and all sorts of other things have entered into the scene and set the prices so low that now we're out of luck. So this is something we see to this day materially, physically, in the communities I work with. So it's just a reminder of what, or just repeating what you said, which is that the effects of what we call neoliberalism, basically the deregulation of private corporate industries so they could do whatever the heck they wanted, which was, when we call this globalization, we mean corporate global power, which is asymmetric, right? Dominantly American, Western, sometimes Chinese. So it's like those effects are felt firsthand here, and the response to it, which I want to share with you and just get your thoughts on, is we just all have to be in it together. Like, we got to find an alternative logic of organizing, not even to contest something, but to create our own new way. They saw Marcos from the Zapatista subcomandante, Marcos used to say, otro mundo es posible, another world is possible. But these communities say not only is another world possible, it's actually right here in front of us. That used to exist, that's the world that still exists, that's the world we're determined to move forward with.
That's very cool. I mean, it's not always easy, but it's right here. Like, if you've fallen to some degree, like most of us have, for the lie that there is no alternative, the famous Margaret Thatcher line that free enterprise is as it is, neoliberal capitalism as it is, without government intervention, is the only way to do things. Footnote, because people are evil. They don't usually say that, but That's the belief system that makes it the only alternative. If you end up believing that, you can think like, wow, so getting to another world is it's such a distance. Like how do we make a whole other system that's as elaborate as the free enterprise system? And the fact is, you don't have to. It's everywhere in the cracks. There's like, I don't know. Right now, I'm dealing with the elder care system. My mother has Alzheimer's, and I'm writing a memoir about my adventures with her. They're good adventures, a lot of them, and her disease, but also with the whole non-system that we have in this country for coping with this completely natural thing that happens to so many people. And right there in this world of elder care, you can see both the system as it is and the neoliberal market system, giant corporations like Atria, or, there's a few of them that have thousands, hundreds of care homes across the US. And they're these big corporations that profit off the misfortune of aging, which, by the way, is completely natural, as is forgetfulness. But they profit off people's misery and they make it miserable, and through their design, which is to extract as much money as possible from families. And so I've seen that world very up close. And I've also seen that there are completely utopian solutions abounding. They're harder to access. They're not just handed to you on a silver platter. They should be. You should get a pamphlet saying, here are the various things you can do when your mother gets Alzheimer's. And none of them is perfect. And they're not easy right now. And it's not accessible to everyone, obviously. But like, there's a town in Belgium that has accommodated mentally ill people since the 13th century. Their patron saint is Saint Dimphnis. The name of the town is Geel, and they've welcomed with open arms mentally ill people to come live with them. And now it's been modernized, so they actually get money from the government. The families get a little money from the government to, just enough to buy food for the extra mouth. But the families love it, the patients love it, Saint Dimphnis probably loves it. It's a win-win situation for everyone, and that's pretty utopian. There are also situations where you can, I've heard of people who have managed to integrate loved ones with Alzheimer's into communities. Like, if they live in a village, it's a lot easier than in a city, but there are neighborhoods and there are villages where it's understood, like, okay, there's a certain number of us that have Alzheimer's. We're not going to lock them away. They're going to wander around, and if you see them, you're going to check and make sure they're okay and see if they need to be led home or whatever. And that's a decent solution that makes no money for any corporation, which is why it's not widely available. But even within the flawed world of our cities where we don't really have that kind of community, there are a number of mom and pop kind of outfits that are their care homes. They look a bit like the corporate care homes, except that the people who run them are there on site, and there's no hierarchy and there's no headquarters to tell people what to do. Like, I had a run-in with Atria where the local headquarters was in Utah, and they made decisions about what happened to my mother from Utah, never having met her or even talked to her doctor or anyone. That's the kind of situation that you have on one hand versus like a local place there. And there are several of those in Tucson. There's also people who open their homes, and like, it's not a guarantee of a wonderful experience, but there are these alternatives that are the closest to utopia we can come. And there are full-on utopian solutions that exist, like this town in Belgium, where there's still suffering. It's not fun to have mental illness or Alzheimer's, or see your loved one like that. It's still fucked up, but it induces much less suffering. It reduces the suffering that corporations like Atria or other big care corporations, in air quotes, uniformly bring about. So, yeah.
Amen. I mean, there's so many things that I want to share back to you to get your thoughts on related to that. And of course, this podcast is called Utopias because it's not because we believe utopias exist per se, but because what a utopia is a world that's increasingly borderless, and one that's where a sense of interdependence and a sense of care and compassion and creativity really can be a source of inspiration, especially at a time when many of us, especially, certainly in the United States, feel very divided and closed off, from one another. So you can even ask the question, what does it mean to care for another? And is a system, this philosopher, academic term here, academic mic drop here, but this philosopher Achille Bembe, who has influenced me a lot, he calls it necropolitical, right? It's about the politics of death, like necromancer, but you can look at examples all around the world, including in the US and from the past, where we didn't see someone who may be unwell or different in a certain sense. We didn't see that as a pathology. We saw that as an opportunity for a real inclusion and a real sense of care, right? Like people who were schizophrenic back in the Greek era were seen as fortune tellers and actually legendary in their communities. Even let's look even at Julius Caesar, right, as an example of that. Foucault has written about that very theme in the book Madness and Civilization. Or, some of these communities here that I've been hanging out with explained to me that during the pandemic, their interest was in how do we even more show up to care for one another, in part because they don't have these sort of often corporate backed resources like hospitals and diagnostic testing kits and even vaccines and other things. So the question is, how do we care for one another, which might involve some physical distancing, but may not only involve that. So that question of care seems to be what could be breaking down these disastrous systems that are now engulfing a lot of our lives.
Yeah. I mean, the big question is how to get from where we are now to as close to utopia as possible. And remembering that utopia is still a place full of suffering. Like, there is no such thing as escaping suffering. It's like, even in the perfect utopian world, that people are going to suffer like hell because aging and death, it happens. You lose people, you lose your own mobility sometimes. This is just nature. But to reduce that as much as possible and to make life as pleasant as possible and to give people the greatest chances to live happy lives, we could just, like a society that did that, we could call utopian. And it would probably involve having money, devoting the money to the right things, and having hospitals and free health care, free elder care, natural free education of a certain level, and some basic services just assumed. And that is easy to imagine, that world. And there are places in the world that come a lot closer to that than does the US or Central America, or there are places where that have sufficient money and an ethos of caring for the population at large, way, way, way in advance of ours. And so the question, I think, is how, well, if you're in one of those societies, how to make it better, because it's not perfect. And if you're in our society, how to get anywhere near that, because we are so behind in the US. Like we do not have a healthcare system. It's laughable to call it a system. It's, or an elder care system. It's a free for all Wild West, winner take all, extract what profit you can from misery. It's like a bunch of cowboys shooting out on the prairie. It's like there's no system. It's a mob. So how do we get from here to there? And it's true, if everybody suddenly became caring, we would get there very quickly. Failing that, what are the tools that we have to get closer to that? Because changing one person at a time, I think it's great to try and to try things at at a local level, at an individual level, to do what you can. If you're a poet, write poems that yeah, everybody can contribute. The question is, like, how is that the only way, or are there other ways that we can get there? That's always been my big question. How do we get closer to a better world? And for a while, my answer was, these interventions, trying to, get news about good things. And I think it's still very valid, and I'm still all about it. I'm writing a book about the S Men right now that includes
You
some
are.
of our, yeah, it'll be out, I don't know, maybe in a year or two or three, from OR Books. It'll be like a compilation, some of our best actions and illustrating certain things about how to make change. And it'll be a fun book. So I still believe in it, but also I've been plunged into this very direct experience of free market capitalism and what it means. And I feel like right now in my life, my response has to be not to suddenly create an action around water rights, which are just as important, but around what's affecting me, and to document it and to make as loud a noise as I can about it using my personal experience. And I have no experience doing this. Like, I have no experience using myself as like my authentic experience as a medium, but this is happening to me and my mother, and now everything's fine, by the way, so that's good. She's in a great mom and pop place that treats everybody quite nicely, and that's how right now I can make an impact. I think is really getting into the nitty gritty of what this system is and what it's doing, and what the utopian alternatives are, which are everywhere.
And we, and I speak for myself at least here, send her a lot of love and best wishes, and to both of you, for her to continue to live as happy and healthy and a life full of love.
And one of the things I'm writing about is given a context where there's actual care going on, and people with Alzheimer's, like anybody else, can tell whether care is faked or not. And in corporate settings, it's always faked. In local settings where the management is right there and affected by what's going on and responding, not only from a financial point of view, but also from a human point of view, the care is much more sincere. And Alzheimer's patients, or I can speak for my mother in any case, it's like night and day. When she feels safe, we have the best conversations we've ever had. They're a little strange and surreal sometimes, but they're deep, and they go into things that we never talked about. She was very protective of her history. It was always her trauma and the stuff she went through. She never wanted to talk about it. She never wanted to saddle anyone with it. And I think she protected herself from it. And now it's just out there, and it doesn't bother her. And she thinks about it. She re-examines it. She dropped a grudge she had against her brother recently, and she had that grudge for about 60 years, 70 years at least. And she just dropped it. I think what he did wasn't really so terrible. I think a lot of people in similar conditions as ours, similar, struggling families in the Great Depression, did that. Probably many families had that exact story. She just forgave him. So there's a very positive side to these things, and I get to be with her and see all this and learn about this stuff that I've also been very interested in for a long time. So part of why I'm writing this is to put value on being with people in these conditions. And it's not just a disease. It's not just a bad condition. If there's a world of trust and a world of caring around you, it can be a really good time of life. And that's the real crime of our big corporate society, and whatever you want to call it, neoliberalism or free market capitalism, or whatever the Zapatistas called it in 1994. It robs humans of humanity, of their humanity, and of what's good in life, in the service of corporate profits.
Perhaps what humanity is about the capacity to care, the capacity to be heard, the capacity to relate, maybe the capacity to move, right? So many people on our planet are facing desertification, the inhabitable landscapes. I've spent time in East and West Africa, in the Sahel region, so many climate or whatever, it's really capitalism connected migrants, right? But they can't move. They're not allowed to move. They drown in the Mediterranean. Just like right down here in southern Mexico, I see Gestapo style paramilitary, like Mexican cops, but clearly paid off by the US government with a lot of like military style, like transformer style gear, rounding up people who are on buses from Chiapas, right, where the Zapatistas come from San Cristobal to Oaxaca, where I am right now. People are getting buses, even like first class buses are getting stopped at checkpoints. So some can move, some get to be human, and some don't. And one of the things I've seen firsthand is, I've interviewed Uber drivers in Uganda for my last book, and they want to strike against Uber. But how do you strike against a company that's 8,000 miles away? Just like how do you protest a drone that might be 10,000 feet or more above you that's dropping a bomb on you, right? So a huge part of what we see, I think, of contemporary global corporate power is displacement, right? It's like, oh, sorry, Atria, your office is in Colorado. You're going to speak to some person who that might be in the Philippines, who's a call center worker for Atria. No one will actually be able to have to be in place to care because the whole system is designed to do the opposite of that.
No, it's a global system that manifests in every which way, and sadly, it dominated global power. It managed to dominate global power. The story of how it did that is fascinating and actually contains some good lessons in how you can fight a hegemony, because the neoliberal hegemony had to fight the hegemony that existed before it, Keynesian. It succeeded. It was the underdog, and by hook or by crook, it took over. And there are ways to fight hegemonies and to change worldviews, and how you do that is, a big question. But I think, the David Graeber and David Wingrove book, The Dawn of Everything, is really helpful in that, looking and realizing that, these things that seem like no alternative, are like this global system that seems all powerful. Really, it's like things have changed dramatically over hundreds of thousands of years. There have been so many experiments, so many political experiments. There have been overthrows and experiments with new forms of government so many times that we can't even count, because often there isn't a record. But they do an excellent job of proving that, linking pieces of evidence that show that there have been these major changes in history that I'm sure were unthinkable to the people at the time, and we can imagine that happening again now, and I think we have to.
Definitely. That's the whole spirit of what this is all about. Our conversation's all about. All of us are, I feel, all about, or those who are here. It's about looking back, looking around, looking up, looking down, looking below. And I guess this allows me to ask you the next question I wanted to ask you, which is really about where technology is headed. And I want to then circle back to ask you about one stunt that you all did as the Yes Men, if you want to speak about it, which is, technologies are increasingly individuating us, right? Like in the sense that, Jacques, you log on to some platform, you're going to see the world as it's ordered for you based on what the corporation behind that technology wants you to consume or look at or get aroused by, or maybe go crazy regarding, like get all pissed off about. It's a certain kind of tunnel that each of us has been placed in that generates and breeds greater suspicion of one another and constructs this whole like nonsense that is a right wing fabrication aided by social media of people who give a damn about one another or about a sense of justice or compassion as being woke. What have you seen happen as someone who is sort of, in a way, an internet veteran, kind of like me? Why has it gone this way? What do you think?
One of my tools, I would say, one of my skills, perhaps my biggest skill in doing the kind of work I've done over the decades and now as well, is sort of tunnel vision. Like, I just really have found it valuable again and again to focus on one thing that I'm concerned about, and recognize that it's a kind of kaleidoscope of everything else,
Yeah.
that you can see it. So right now I'm concerned about elder care because of my personal situation, but I realize that it's just, kaleidoscope's not the right word. It's a microcosm, it's an opening, it's a little viewfinder, a viewer on the big world, and it's exactly what's happening in many different ways in many different places. So, like doing these actions, like when we did the BBC action, let's say, it was, there was this one very specific situation that was profoundly offensive. And that was, well, the Bhopal catastrophe was the company Union Carbide that had a plant, a substandardly maintained plant in Bhopal, India, that exploded, killing a bunch of tens of thousands of people over the years. And they never compensated the victims. And Dow Chemical purchased Union Carbide and also never compensated the victims and said they had no responsibility for it, but they had purchased the company, so they did have responsibility for it. Every year since then, that was in 2002, I think, that they purchased it, 2001. There have been massive protests in Bhopal to hold them accountable. And, that's one situation. And it's deeply offensive because you have this American company killing a bunch of people because they don't have lawyers and getting away with it and fleeing Indian justice, the CEO of Union Carbide. And, there's all sorts of things about that that's just like, it makes your teeth hurt. You could go from there to ask, what's the nature of the corporation and but it's useless. It's like what you have is an example of a corporation doing an incredibly bad thing. And it's not rocket science to see from there what's wrong with corporations. So that's what we did when we focused on that issue, and made a big splash around that issue. It was like basically trying to highlight that this big U.S. corporation had purchased this defunct corporation and was refusing to do anything about its past crimes. And just by focusing on that and the various aspects of that, it basically highlighted the whole problem with our corporate system, with this idea that corporations should be free to do whatever the fuck they want. They're protected as people under the Constitution, persons, legal persons. There's so much wrong, and you don't even have to say what it is. All you have to do is point to this situation. And so I don't really think about oh, how did everything change to get us to ChatGPT or whatever. It's the way my mind works is there's these examples of how wrong things are, and that's fruitful to bring up. And if it shines a light on the bigger picture of things, then so much the better. And it does. I mean, that's why I'm writing this about elder care and the fucked upness of our elder care non-system, is to shine a bigger light on what's wrong with everything, not just elder care. It's not just about my mother and everything. It's very personal because of that, but it's really about how can anybody think this is okay? This is just deeply, deeply offensive. And so was the fact that, Dow was not compensating the victims of the Bhopal catastrophe. And they settled their lawsuits in America. They settled the lawsuits of the defunct company in America, but they didn't give a shit in India,
Where everyone got
where
killed.
everybody got killed. And in the US, nobody got killed. It's just they had lawsuits. And yeah, so you point these things out. So I don't have an answer to what happened over the decades to lead us to this situation, because what I do know is that there are these cases that really clarify, and if there's any way to spread the idea of utopia and counter utopia, dystopia and utopia, to get those ideas across, to get the idea that there is a good way to do things, there are bad ways to do things. Or I should say it the other way around. There are good ways to do things, and there is a bad way to do things. One no, many yeses. And citing those, maybe really bringing that to the fore, and also looking at the positive in these cases and the way things could be. maybe that is one way that culture can be changed so that people can find the compassion and the desire to see things really change in a macro way and make it happen. Because that's ultimately what's going to make the difference, right? Is people just having enough of it and just being so fed up that they shut it down. Like, this cannot continue like this. And, how do you get people to that place? I mean, there are examples of books like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair or Silent Spring by Rachel Carson or and so on, that have made a difference because people see them and they just can't believe it. It's like, and it's intolerable. There's also, like, I recently learned that uh, the songs of the Humpback Whales released in 1970 actually it was an album of recordings of humpback whale songs, directly led to the Endangered Species Act of 1973. A disc, like, communicate what is fucked up about killing whales, and then 10 years later, commercial whaling was banned. So these are very specific things. It's not like nobody is moved by how has the system gone awry. People are moved by this is fucked up that we're killing whales. Listen to these people. Listen to what they sound like when they talk to each other. How can we be killing them?
I mean, sometimes we can learn a great deal from non-humans, right? Like we see these examples, I'm sure you read, of orcas attacking the right types of fossil fuel boats. Like, how intelligent is that? That they're identifying what boats they can actually enact counteraction to, and are identifying strategically ways to try to defend themselves and recognize that these are kinds of boats. So intelligence, that's another huge colonization of where technology has gone. It's based upon this hyper self-centered, human-centered, but really Western and male-centered and heteronormative centered idea of intelligence, which is super messed up,
I heard about this orcas attacking boats thing, and I didn't research it. What I heard is that they are attacking sailboats.
Well, I read about them attacking certain types of smaller fossil fuel industry boats, but maybe there's
Okay, yeah, I have no idea.
I just think it's a great opportunity, since I asked you about technology, just to remind everyone who's listening, there was no commerce permitted on the internet until around the late 90s. You could probably correct me if I'm wrong, like in the 90s itself. The internet, of course, it was a US taxpayer paid technology, but all the profits and benefits of those infrastructures have gone to private corporations without any debt back to the public. Just like Amazon vehicles are on the road everywhere with surveillance cameras all around them and without paying any taxes. That's where these new technologies have gone, but it really doesn't have to be that way, because they're based on a highly limited, misguided view, I think, of life and humanity. And sometimes when I'm trying to be like really nice or conciliatory, I say, hey, well, these guys in engineering, they didn't really learn. There's not a lot of training on ethics, or forget political movements, or deepen notions of history, or anything like economics. So can I ask you to then tell me the story a little bit, like play by play, of what you did with the BBC? So, one of your names I know you go by is Andy Bickelbaum, and I know another that was the name that was Jude Finisterra. That was the name you used for, I think, an amazing, not merely a prank, but a way to drive, as you said, a deeper sense of news, bringing the news to the public. I think you brought the news to the public with some embellishment, right?
Yeah, the way that happened in 2001, Dow purchased Union Carbide, and I had been chatting with somebody at Greenpeace. Well, because of the the fake shell website I had made, I mentioned I was invited to a conference because of that dumb website, and I met a Greenpeace campaigner there who was also at that conference, and we stayed in touch and we remained in contact. And he followed the Yes Men and what we were doing. We were doing these anti-WTO impersonations. We did maybe 4 or 5 of them, and they're all several of them are in our first movie, simply called The Yes Men. And it's he followed that, and then When Dow purchased Union Carbide in 2001, well, Greenpeace had a goal, a very simple goal. It was to associate the name Dow with Bhopal, because Union Carbide, was the one that committed the criminal negligence that killed so many people. But Dow had purchased Union Carbide, so they wanted to associate Dow and Bhopal. And my friend at Greenpeace said, "Hey, you guys have done all this stuff around the WTO. What about trying that against Dow?" So I just did the least imaginative thing possible. And I created a fake website for Dow with a similar URL and a completely similar look, but different material on the front page. I wouldn't call it satirical, but maybe overly transparent. It's Dow just, and the main thing was like Dow asserting, this was on the one of the 18th anniversary, I think, of the Bhopal disaster, that they would never, asserting that they would never do right by the people of Bhopal, because the people of Bhopal simply don't have lawyers. They can't afford lawyers. And so there's no reason for them to do anything, and their shareholders should just relax. They're never going to take responsibility for Bhopal. So we wrote a press release to that effect. We, Dow, will never take responsibility. That's our statement. And it's because they can't afford lawyers, and that's how we operate. That's how we roll. And we sent it out to the press. I blasted it out with a little script to a bunch of journalists, and I don't know who fell for it, but the New York Times wrote an article about the action, that action, about the fake website and the fake press release and what it was about. So there was just that one article and maybe a couple others, but it wasn't like a wave of giant press. It was just like, look at what they did. Isn't that cool? This is an interesting way to protest. And story over. But because it was 2002 and, still very primitive internet search engines, the fact that they had written that article citing our URL meant that, if you went searching for Dow Chemical, you would often stumble onto our fake website instead. And so that's what happened in 2004, just before the 20th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster. A researcher at the BBC, one of the few news organizations actually covering the 20th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster, because they're British, a lot of Indian people in Britain, so they cover the disaster, they know about the disaster. Also, there had been some budget cuts at the BBC, so they didn't actually do the right amount of research on who they were contacting and stuff. And they had I think an intern reach out to Dow, contact Dow and see if they're available to talk on that, make a statement. And so he did. He just Googled Dow, stumbled on our site, emailed us, and of course, we responded that we would be absolutely thrilled to speak, and that we had a really big announcement that would make everybody happy. Maybe it was a big announcement, couldn't say what it was, and got them excited, but also made sure that, well, to think about it. We made sure to think about it this time. Like the previous time, the press release I blasted out just said, we're never going to compensate them. So we had to think, like, what are we going to say when we're on TV if this is real and if this is not a police trap? What are we going to say that's going to get the world's attention? And so we decided to say the opposite thing, that we're going to take complete responsibility for it. Obviously, we were mistaken not to a few years ago, and now we're going to, and here's what we're going to do, and here's the other thing we're going to do. And I had 6 talking points, basically, that I was going to, and we worked on this with Greenpeace, with my friend at Greenpeace and others, exactly what the talking points were. They had done, they had much more research than we did. That's what they do. They do research and action, but they actually have teams that can do research. So we, that's one of the reasons to partner with an organization.
Yeah.
But yeah, we came up with this way of doing it, and this way that we thought would get some attention. And on the day, we went to the studio of the BBC. It happened to be in Paris because I happened to be living in Paris at the time, and we thought it might be less risky doing it in London in the big office. And it
Yeah.
turned out, yeah, in Paris, all they had was a little tiny office with one person in it. So it wasn't very, there was less likelihood of being found out. And yeah, I went on live and announced that, we were taking full responsibility. We were liquidating Union Carbide for $12 billion, which is what they actually paid for it. And, using the funds to compensate the survivors, clean up the site, do all these good things. Basically, what they should do is a kind of prefigurative action. Not utopian, because utopian vision, corporations like Dow wouldn't exist. It would be there would be another way of doing things. But
Well,
you know,
sure.
given that you have a big corporation, what's the best it could do? This would be it. And the reason, by the way, I chose the name Jude Finisterra is because Saint Jude is the patron saint of impossible things. Um,
Oh,
and Finisterre is the end of the world. So it's basically saying this will never ever happen.
Fin de terra, like fin of terra, right? Ends of the world.
Like ends of the like physically end of the world, but and it was basically saying like this is never going to happen. What you're seeing now is never going to happen, and I actually say that during the broadcast. I say this is the first time a corporation has done the right thing just because it's right. This does not happen, so be grateful. And it's important to remember that this is not a solution. There is nothing utopian evolution about that because it's never going to happen until we change the whole system that promotes profit over everything else. So, like, as long as you have corporations that value profit over human life, you're going to have stuff like that. Which is true in
yeah.
elder care. You're going to have abuse and horror as long as you have corporations that value profit more than human lives, and they do if they're large corporations. That's just their nature. So yeah, that was the point of that, and that's basically what happened. Afterwards, we found out. Well, it became the top news in the world on Google News at least, and
Yep.
for a little while it was believed. And during that little time when it was believed by the entire world to be true, Dow's stock lost $2 billion, and to us that was a very clear lesson in why this doesn't happen, why this is completely impossible, because
You're right.
immediately the shareholders would punish the corporation in question. So it
Yeah.
can't happen.
Amazing. I'll just say two things here. One is you also said something. I watched that video many times, and actually, I showed that video of you on the BBC. It was you on the BBC as Jude Finisterra. And I've also seen, in one of the Yes Men movies, the like green screen behind the scenes, like the whole lead up to it all. But one thing you said was, and you quoted, I believe, someone from Union Carbide or Dow. You said, this isn't just plenty good enough for an Indian," and I think that's something interesting because
That was an actual quote.
yeah, it's an actual quote. Oh yeah, just give them a little bit or give them nothing, or the first order recipients give them like some simple things, not real not a real response to the deaths we caused. But it's also worth noting that Bhopal is a central Indian city. I've taken the train. I'm Tamilian from South India. I've taken the train to Delhi with my dad and my brother, and you go right through Bhopal. So a lot of the central Indian states and some toward the east are the most destitute. They're the ones, and there are a lot of tribal communities in the center of India. And it's also worth noting that some of the major resistance movements, some of which have violent aspects to it, like the Naxalites, are coming from those regions of India, from Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, other regions in the sort of center east, but really the center.
The horror of Bhopal, I mean, among other things, is that the pesticides that they were producing there that blew up were part of the Green Revolution that, among other things, made large farms more profitable and put a lot of small farms out of business. And the small farmers that could no longer sell their crops because they weren't using the big industrial methods that the Green Revolution involved became destitute, and they settled in the worst parts of India. For example, around the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal, which exploded. So it was actually the victims of the plant that the plant killed. You know, by an indirect little twist, it was the poorest of the poor who died that night. It wasn't the people in the city. It wasn't the middle class areas. It wasn't the. It was the people who had to settle right around the plant because there was no other land that anybody was willing to share.
And that's a common theme, that we live in a world where systems are displacing us from our material connection to our communities and our land, right? That's something that's very consistent with here in Mexico. Also, in the example of India, we see the same sort of story again and again, you know. And I wanted to mention to you that actually not I had 85 students in my undergrad class. We watched that 6 minute clip, and I was like, what do you think's going on here? Not a single one of them could figure out that that was a prank. They were just all mystified. They were like, oh, I guess what's going on here that's weird is that, I mean, in a sense, it was correct, is that he actually apologized. That's weird. I've never heard that before. But they didn't realize that that's so fantastical, not just apology, but actual action.
There's nothing unreasonable about like in a normal world where the things you learn as a child obtain as an adult, like share, be nice, don't kill. Um, that is what Dao would say. That is exactly what you would see on TV. So the fact that they didn't suspect it is testament to their basic health. Like
Yeah,
yeah, it is what should be. That and that I guess is a little bit of utopia. Not fully, but a
absolutely.
little bit.
Well, I think one thread that I've seen in you and in the Yes Men is there is something aspirational about it. Like there's something about here's what a different world could look like that's partly informed by like the truth, like just the actual information, the actual news. But then there's this sort of like speculative aspect where, or you called it prefigurative, where it's sort of like these are things that are actually could happen and could happen perhaps easily. And so an example of that were the printing, and you have to tell me how many of the New York Times, like a fake, I don't know if I want to call it fake, but a different New York Times was created by both of you, if I'm not mistaken.
Myself and a collaborator named Steve Lambert
Oh, cool.
at the Center for Artistic Activism. We it was Steve's idea to begin with, and it evolved through many iterations and was the most nightmarish project to do. It was an entire
I'm
real
sure.
New York Times, basically 14 pages, small, but man, that's hard to do. Make a newspaper. Never make a newspaper. Um, but we printed 100,000 copies
Oh,
and got them all over Manhattan in all the news offices. And it yeah, that really worked as a news thing. And it was 1 week after Obama's victory. And it took us 6 months to make, so we were
again.
banking on his victory. Thank God he won. I mean, for many reasons, obviously. But like a week after he won, we issued. We had people distribute street teams distribute this paper, post dated 6 months into the future to show what the world could look like if pressure continued, if pressure was put on Obama, like a huge upswelling of annoyance and disgust with policies that came before him brought him to power. And then our point was to show the world that could happen if that same amount of energy and pressure and utopian thinking could continue and really hold his feet to the fire. And that didn't
No, it didn't. It
happen.
didn't.
Yeah, yeah, we keep on
Yeah.
keeping on exactly as we can in whatever context we find ourselves. So for me now, it's writing about care homes, but yeah,
Well, that's actually where I want to kind of close our conversation, because I don't want to take too much of your time. And I know you must get this question all the time. How have you guys avoided not being like in prison many times or for a long period of time, like police stuff, legal stuff? Like, how do you deal with that? Because I'm sure you have a lot of powerful people who are pissed about stuff you've done with Halliburton, with the Department of Homeland Security, EPA. Like, there's been so many amazing stunts, interventions, whatever we want to call them.
No, it's that, yeah, literally, like, if they sue us, we get a lot of publicity. It's as simple as that. Like, that's basically, I think, what protects us. And also it's not clear. The legality isn't clear, so we can't. It's not easy to figure out what's legal or not. So, like, we clearly committed a lot of illegal things when we did the New York Times. We stole their trademark, which is a different category from copyright, and it's much worse.
Really?
But the idea of the New York Times trying to squelch the free speech of some activists, like, clearly they're not going to do that. That would just be terrible, terrible optics for a newspaper that depends on the First Amendment. And so that was our calculation there. With corporations, it's always like, yeah, come after us and you'll get a lot of attention. And that did happen with the Chamber of Commerce. They sued us for a thing we did, but and they got a lot of attention for suing us, but negative attention. But they don't care. They're a nonprofit that serves large corporations. They're a lobbying organization, so they just don't care. Most of our targets are, um, you know, McDonald's. I mean, corporations that everybody knows, or that somewhat have to think about public perception.
There's been, I mean, the Halliburton stunts were incredible. The stuff after Hurricane Katrina, the stuff with Department of Homeland Security. I watch Democracy Now! Like almost every day, and even while I'm traveling, and I've seen them cover some of the stuff you all have been up to, among other things. So Jacques, I'll close by asking you then. Where do you feel like we can go, right? Like, there's social movements, there's different modes of journalism, there's that artistic practice of actions, there's alternative models we can introduce, there's policy. I know there's sort of an overwhelming feeling of like there's this problem, there's this problem, this problem, but I think they're very interconnected, as you and I have talked about today. What are your sort of dreams, if you have them, or aspirations, or where, do you feel like you're heading? I mean, I know you're writing a memoir now. What about the Yes Men? Talk to me about where you feel you're moving. You're as vibrant as ever. So, there's going to be a lot more we're going to be hearing from you, I hope.
The question of what anybody can do or should do is way above my pay grade.
Yeah, all of them.
And really, you know, each person has to ask themselves, how can I make an effect in this world? What is my lever? Who was it? Archimedes, give me a lever and I'll move the world. If you give me a place to stand, like, what's your place to stand that you can move the world from? It changes all the time. So, or every 20 years maybe. I don't know. Depends on your life. And so you just have to kind of figure out what you want to do. Like, do you love music? Music is a great vehicle for messages and for, honest communication. There's some just beautiful music, not propaganda music, just like, really heartfelt music that communicates stuff that gets past reason, the reasoning, the blocks that we have against, the filters that we have against reality sometimes. And, any art form can do that. And I guess that's, in a sense, that's what we've been trying to do with the Yes Men, like, just, making these spectacles that are surprising, or these actions that aren't what you expect to see, getting things into the newspaper. So yeah, for me, I'm doing stuff with the Yes Men. I'm helping to, brainstorm things, and I'm very slowly kind of trying to put together this book that I want to be useful. But the main way I feel like I can be useful in the next little bit is by finishing this memoir about my mom, and what the so-called care system is has put us through, and how it's emblematic of a bigger problem, and how much could change, because it's just the way what I'm seeing right now. So that's what I've decided.
Great. And, just as an addendum, because I'm going to ask all of our guests this, any any people or initiatives that you really look up to that we can pay attention to? I mean, I know we met Frances Fox Piven in person. That was amazing. Her work was really influential, I know, on you, and it was something I read when I was in college. Are there other folks, that we should pay attention to so we can just shake ourselves out of this traumatizing kind of disabling thing that's happening?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and one I currently don't have a simple answer for. Francis is timeless, and the book Poor People's Movements, written in 1974, is still ultra relevant, and communicates how change has happened. I think the main thing is just to look at examples of how change has happened in the past. I mean, one book that's filled me with excitement and hope is The Dawn of Everything. David Graeber unfortunately passed away. He was a friend. He was important in Occupy, but David Wengrow is still around, and that book is incredible because it really provides a different perspective on what's possible. And I think that lesson that many things are possible and that humanity has tried many, many experiments is like really extremely valuable. Like, and there's been hundreds of thousands of years, not 10,000 years of civilization. There's been a lot more than that. And even within that mere 10,000 years, there's a lot that we have misinterpreted and not seen. And that book helps to kind of bring a lot of that to light. And it's solid. There's a lot of solid anthropology and archaeology around that. It's just kind of underserved in the media. Like we had, like the idea that basically things were super nice and egalitarian until civilization came along and then they sucked. That's the standard narrative, and it's simply not true. That's not the way it worked. There was good and bad for a very long time, and there was good fighting bad, and they do a wonderful job. So if there's one book I'd suggest reading for both pleasure and hope and change, and it would be that book.
The Dawn of Everything. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to chat with you about this, and we'll keep talking over the years.
Thank you, Ramesh.
The Utopias podcast with Professor Ramesh Srinivasan is produced and edited by me, Phoebe Browse. You can access episodes on all streaming platforms. And if you have questions or comments, please email podcastutopias@gmail.com. That's podcastutopias@gmail.com. See you all next time.